Okay, while people are thinking of questions, to everyone here, what has been your thinking on the diversification of energy in Ethiopia, where you came from, and what was on the question that Megan raised about was the secondary cities have enough human resources, budget, staff, tools to actually engage and actually produce and actually manage energy locally, at least the distribution locally correctly? What was the capacity locally?
The first part of your question in terms of what can be done in terms of energy diversification, well, I mean, so Ethiopia is actually very well endowed with high level of potential for several renewable energy sources, chief of which is hydroelectricity. It has about 30,000 megawatts or 30 gigawatts of hydro, technically, economically feasible hydro potential. Similarly, it has another 10,000 megawatts of wind potential and another 15,000 megawatts of geothermal potential, which is base load. Currently, it is exploiting less than 10% of its hydro potential and less than 1% of all of its other renewable potential, including municipal solid waste and everything else. So really the only thing it's exploiting right now is biomass, and in the power sector, it's hydroelectricity. So there is scope for diversity. I think a resilient energy system in Ethiopia means one with more diversity, so it is more responsive to and adaptive to shocks, whether it be climate change or something else. So we do think that there's scope to increase wind and geothermal and also hydro if done right. And the second part of your question was as to the governance capacity. Well, I mean, we certainly met with several, several people who had been thinking about this and had done a lot of really good, strong work in this area. We met with the government department, sort of Ministry of Energy and others. I think there's the will to move in the right direction. They have a national green economy strategy. There is the idea that they want to transition from an agrarian society, agrarian economy to an industrial economy, and there's an understanding that they need more energy for it. But in terms of the actual technical governance capacity on the ground, there is room for growth. There's more to be done there. Barbara.
I think, if I can just comment on that, I mean, we didn't get into any kind of detailed analysis of what capacity exists, certainly nothing of the scale of the capacity analysis that was done in the project that was presented yesterday. I think for me, if one can turn the question on its head, the question is, if you want to move in a particular direction, where can you actually access the capacity? And it might be that it comes through partnerships with communities. It might be that it comes through partnerships with the private sector. It might be simply buying in the capacity. There are various ways of building capacity. The real question is, what is it you want to achieve, and then what is the most innovative way of finding that capacity?
Yeah, I'll just have one sentence to add because Barbara covered what I wanted to say. I think we can't expect municipalities or government to do everything, and I think it's partnerships that are essential. And for me, my biggest passion when I started a career in climate change was actually community-based adaptation, which is a difficult nut to crack, but I think it's so essential, and I think we need better research in how we can unlock those mechanisms. But one of the first things will be national governments' ability to allow more decentralization of solutions. And I think that's a challenge across Africa where there's quite centralized energy systems, often centralized water systems, and that's a difficult one to tackle.
Decentralization of solutions, that's a strong, it's a really good point. Any more questions from the audience? At least a few questions from the audience. Maybe they didn't have enough coffee this morning. No more questions? The issue of powering from the central area versus the more the city production of energy, was that something that they were thinking about? Is it something that you would promote, at least in the Ethiopian context? Maybe others from your own experience, would that be something that you'd be looking forward and actually because the countries are huge. Ethiopia is a huge country. I mean, if you go to DRC, that's several times any size of the cities of Africa. There's a question down there.
Quick question. Much of what you focused on was on power generation. You didn't cover much related to transport and moving goods and people around. Perhaps you could comment on that.
Yes. And there would another question after that.
Yeah. The thing that I'm looking at here is a comment. I feel a little bit bombarded by research, and both yesterday and today. And I think there's an interesting discussion coming here from Megan specifically, which is how do you translate research into change management? And one of the possible ways forward from the forum, in my view, would be that, first of all, we need think tanks at national level, because if you're working within a country, I'm based in Uganda, you get so many different research projects coming in, donor programs and so on, and they all have their own languages. And because we're chasing them all the time, we never manage to develop our own language. So we need to have our language and then work out which research we want to deploy. Then that needs to relate down to this question about the vast number of technocrats who've got no education and are basically sitting there passing time, trying to find ways of earning money, mostly illegally. And so how do we bridge that gap? Now, for me, one of the principles maybe that we need to have going forward is the amount of research that's done has to be limited in relation to the amount of effort that's put into making it happen on ground. We need to say we can't do too much research because it's actually giving us a problem.
Yeah, your point taken. Yes, madam, there. There's also a gentleman. There's 2 more questions. Okay. Madam, and then a gentleman there. From the UN, I think.
I'm a sir.
You're a sir.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to raise a question about transport, but you didn't talk about energy demand at all, particularly in construction and...
Can you speak a little louder?
I said there was no discussion of energy demand, particularly in housing. I think is an issue as well.
Okay, good point. Thank you. Madam?
Yes, good morning. Sabine from NALAC, National Association of Local Governments of Ghana. I hope all of you had a good start into the day. So good morning once again. I want to create awareness about one thing. I like the discussion that was coming up from the panelists. We have local economic development. Here in Ghana, LED. Here in Ghana, we have a policy for local economic development also. At least there's a policy. I'm not talking about that is implementing, but we have a policy. So this local economic development requests a new approach on cooperation and networking. And I think that actually the local government could be the driving forces, connecting civil society organizations, connecting their citizens, connecting private sector to work towards a sustainable environment and to create jobs for youth, to consider the needs of vulnerable groups, to involve women groups also. So I was a little bit, so this to me is very important, and I was a little bit irritated because somebody of you said, well, they don't have the mandate. Like the national government should create a framework, if I get this right, to give the mandate to local government. So there's still a question mark on my side. So maybe we can deepen into this. I hope, or I'm sure that LED, local economic development, is known, and I'm sure that it's not only Ghana who has a policy. However, it is just a policy.
Very good point. I mean, decentralization is a huge topic. Maybe later on, City Alliance would like to talk more about it. Last question, gentlemen. I think it's on the UN. The one yet.
WHO, UN as well. The point is, I think the paper was very good. I think perhaps one aspect which has not been covered is how to crack the issue of the behavior change in households, which has enormous implications for resilience, but also for public health. And I'm a medical doctor, so I acknowledge my perspective. And I think one thing that we medical doctors and the health systems have done is to advise individuals about their behavior change on tobacco, on diet, on physical activity, on a number of things. And we haven't done that for indoor air pollution and improved energy solutions, when we know that half of the pneumonia deaths in children under 5 are caused by indoor air pollution. So I think there's potential there in sort of reaching out to the people who work with the poor or who are in communities and who have direct contact to engage more in that direction. And just as nobody talked about that opportunity, I just wanted to raise that. And perhaps you're doing that in Ethiopia, but you just haven't raised. Thank you.
Very good point. So the last point on this, Shreya and Barbara, what was the impact on health and behavior change actually on the energy use? The issue of a data-led policy, the issue of mobility was that part of the research, not so much, or experience of the others on the mobility and the energy consumption and decentralization as a whole. What was your impact there? Yeah.
I'll give it a go in answering some of those questions, and then I'll hand over to Shravya. The issue of transport, it was not part of our brief. We specifically didn't actually look at the transport issues because that was getting us into far too wide a scope in terms of what we were trying to look at. So hence we didn't mention it at all. In terms of the issue of research to policy, I can't agree with you more. I think issues of what research is needed and how it translates into policy would ideally be generated from within the country and driven from within the country, because amongst other things, that's how you get the institutional memory within the country. So yes, I would I would support that. In terms of the issue of the local government mandate, yes, local government has a mandate around local economic development, absolutely. What they don't have in Ethiopia is any kind of mandate around energy generation. And so that's where the context of the issue of mandate comes into play, specifically in relation to the issue of generation of energy. The issue of health and behavior change is a very interesting one. Yes, there are significant issues around health in terms of the use of biomass for cooking. I think there were two things that struck me that were quite interesting. The one was that there were people doing research into, for example, improved cook stoves, etc. But there still seems to be a bit of a division between what's going on in terms of technical research and what's going on in terms of issues of behavior change and uptake. And the transdisciplinarity that actually would bring those two together is not something that we've found as happening particularly widely. I think the other thing that struck me that was very interesting was that there was a very strong difference on gender lines in terms of the response to energy alternatives. And so, for example, men were more interested in having electrical sources because, amongst other things, it enabled them to charge cell phones, etc., whereas women were looking for improved cook stoves. But again, linking back to something that one of the discussants said, there was an issue around the fact that injera tastes better when it's produced on a traditional stove than when it's produced on any other kind of stove. And so those cultural issues around what one is trying to address in terms of energy options and the gender issues are actually quite important to take into account.
I'll just quickly address the question of energy demand. Yes, Ethiopia has done energy demand projections, energy demand modeling, and as you rightly said, it is projected to go up significantly. Right now, annual energy demand growth is one of the highest in Africa. It's about 25% per annum at present. And of course, with industrial growth, this is likely to go up even more. One of the other interesting things we found about industrial energy demand is that actually, even more than power, it is largely thermal energy. And so even industries, of course, are using a lot of fossil fuel for that. That's where there is an interesting opportunity for fuel switching to provide thermal energy for, say, cement plants. Just that note on energy demand.
Megan, Lise, or Sylvia, some last comments? Yeah, Sylvia, go ahead. Lise, yeah.
All right, just one last comment. I'm also a public health practitioner, the gentleman who had a comment back there, so fully appreciate it. I think that, again, going back to the qualities of resilient systems, you know, reflection is one of those qualities. And Ethiopia, in my time working in Ethiopia, I worked in the health sector, but Ethiopia has a very rich network of community health workers. And I think that that is a network that could be leveraged to underscore some of the hazards around cooking with biomass. So I think that there is a need for further exploration there, and specifically targeting poor and vulnerable populations. I also think that our conversation somewhat this morning has been a bit myopic in the sense that we focus primarily on energy generation, but there are really key opportunities in energy conservation and efficiency as well. And while cities don't have the mandate and the capacity really to focus on energy generation, I think that they're key players in energy conservation. So in the city of Dakar, for example, where many of the public buildings don't have thermostats and are consumers of the largest consumers of energy, and so that city is looking at something as simple as installing thermostats in buildings, and then also training electricians to be able to install thermostats, which has the added benefit of creating jobs and economic opportunities, and so I think it's worth also considering some of those.
Thanks, Lise. Sylvia, last word? One for the road?
Okay, maybe one point related to this, because I was thinking in energy efficiency, I haven't raised it too much because I believe there are other priorities in some African cities that need to be addressed first. But energy efficiency is something key we're working on. However, it is very difficult to bear in mind. With energy efficiency, the main issue is this rebound effect. You can make a city a lot more efficient, but in the end, people want to pay X for the electricity they consume. So if you make their building more efficient, they will still consume the same amount, or they will increase their consumption because they are paying less for it. So that's something to take into account. You can improve the livelihoods, but still consumption will go up, and that's when going back to generation. That's going to be the big challenge in the future.
Megan, some last point?
Yeah, my point's related to the point around action research. That's absolutely vital, and I think we need good knowledge brokers that are able to bridge the gap between research and practitioners, scientists and practitioners. And I'm involved in a very exciting project where we're trying to get climate scientists to talk to municipal practitioners around what science they need to make better informed decisions. But when I say that it's been an eye-opener for the scientists and the practitioners, I'm completely underestimating it. The different languages spoken, the different discourses, navigating that process which ICLEI's trying to do to get the scientists and practitioners to be able to talk to each other has been arduous, but I can't stress enough how exciting that research process is. And it's walking that hard road. So I think it's absolutely essential, but we need good knowledge brokers who can speak both scientist and practitioner. And we need to realize that this takes time, but I think it's absolutely vital. Research can't continue and not get used. Then why are we doing it?